fourth period and hello sixth period and happy Friday. It's Mr. Anderson. It's Wednesday for me right now, but for you it is Friday. I'm talking to you from across the sands of time. Now, everybody, if you follow this video, that will give you all you need to do in class today. All right? If there is a substitute there, and I hope there is, please treat this person with respect and listen to what they say. But on the whole, you're going to be working independently today. Now, sixth period, you are only going to watch this video through the sentence pattern and the instructions about reading because you've already done the other part of it. Fourth period, you are going to watch the entire video, all right? So please make sure you do that, and I expect that everyone has done this stuff, and we are going to be using the stuff you do today to build up to our next assignment. So this is not a free day. This is not just time to relax. Even if you have still not finished your essay on the Yi family, this is not time to work on that unless you get everything else done, all right? So please focus on the video, and let's begin right now. So on the screen in front of you, you already see a sentence pattern. This is sentence pattern H. You all know what to do. You should have your sentence patterns in front of you. You can pause the video and you can write down sentence pattern H right now. All right, well, hopefully you wrote it down. So now I'm going to break it down to you, and then you're going to write 3 of them on your own. So this might remind you a little bit of the sentence pattern we did last class, which was sentence pattern G, because of the way it sounds. This one says, my dislike of McDonald's is not simply an issue of how it tastes. I don't like the way they treat their employees. So again, we're using a colon, right, the 2 dots to indicate kind of a before and an after, or evidence of what you say after you say it. So in the same way, you're going to be making a statement where you're saying something like, it's not just this, it's also this. And that means we're going to reuse the phrase, is not simply an issue of. Every single one of your sentences is going to have this in the middle of it. It's not simply an issue of. And every single one of your sentences is going to have this colon here. All right? Other than that, it's going to be kind of you filling in the blanks. But I want to make a couple of points here. The subject of your sentence, in this case, it's my dislike of McDonald's. It needs to be in the form of a noun. In other words, it should not sound like a sentence by itself. It should just be a thing. In this case, the subject, the thing, is my dislike, right? That's something I have. The sentence doesn't say, I dislike McDonald's. It says, my dislike of McDonald's. So make sure that whatever you're saying in that first part is phrased as a thing, as a noun, and not as you doing something or somebody doing something. There should be no verb in that first part. The rest of it, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. The part that should make sense by itself is the part after the colon. This should be a complete sentence, right? If I got rid of this and I just say, I don't like the way they treat their employees, that would make sense by itself, okay? So make sure that the second part makes sense on its own. Let me give you an example, and then you're going to do 3 on your own. What if I make the topic our local basketball team, the Washington Wizards? The Wizards' bad record, notice that's the thing. The Wizards' bad record. I didn't say the Wizards have a bad record. The Wizards' bad record is not simply an issue, right? I'm going to rephrase that, of, it's not simply an issue of having bad players. And then I will say, what else is also at play here? I will say something like, their coaching is also terrible, right? The Wizards' bad record is not simply an issue of having bad players. Their coaching is also terrible, right? So everybody, that's this pattern. I don't think it's super tricky. Just make sure that you are making that first part a noun by itself. Notice that a noun, you can take any kind of emotion and turn it into a noun. So if you want to say, you know, I love Taylor Swift, you wouldn't say, I love Taylor Swift, and it's not simply an issue of. You would say, my love of Taylor Swift is not simply an issue. If you have fear or you're anxious about something, you wouldn't say, I'm scared. You could say, my fear of spiders is not simply an issue of. All right? So I hope sentence pattern H is simple for you. That's the first thing you're going to do today. You can pause the video now, do it, and then come back, and I'll explain the second part. All right, the second part of class, and this is obvious, is you are going to do your reading as per usual. You are welcome to go over to the cabinets, open them up, bring your book back, and read quietly. So that is self-explanatory. I don't have to say anything more about that, but I do expect you to do it. Sixth period, if you get through the sentence pattern and you got through your reading, you are off the hook and you can have the rest of the time to yourself. If you need to work on the essay that's now late, you should do that. But period 4, you now have a very important task, all right? So listen, make sure that you are going to do this. I expect you to have done it. If you notice somebody, one of your friends in period 4 is off doing something else, you can go remind them, hey, remember, you have to do this today in class on Friday. Now, what am I talking about? Everybody in here needs to go get a copy of this book. It's called The Penguin Book of Migration Literature. If you look over at the side of the classroom, you're going to see them stacked there. Go over there and pick one up. All right, one of these books should be in your hand, and we are going to be reading part of, or really all of, a story that's inside this book right now. Once you're inside, you're going to find page 23, and you're going to be looking at a story called Come Japanese by someone named Julie Otsuka. All right, so go ahead, open your book to this, and I'm going to explain what I expect of you today. So this story, we're going to read it, and I need you to have read the whole thing, and hopefully by the end of class you will have done that. This story is very interesting in its perspective. It is from the perspective of a group of women who are on a boat coming over to America to meet the men they are going to marry. In most cases, they're going to marry an American man. Now, this is something that still happens today, but it used to be a lot more common, is that men would work with an agency and they would have women in other countries, often women who did not speak any English, who wanted to come to America, who would agree to marry these men, and they would say goodbye to their families, pack their bags, get on a big boat, a big ocean-going vessel, and they would sail over to America, having never met their husband. Sometimes all they would have known was a picture. Maybe the husband sent them a picture. I want to make it clear that these women are not being forced to do this. That's important. These are not slaves or anybody in a situation where they're being trafficked, or you might have heard of human trafficking. That's not what this is. These women did agree to get married, although in some cases they were desperate to get out of the country or start a new life or something. And realize that they, many cases, don't know any English. They have no idea what America's like. And this moment in the boat is really their last time with other people from their culture, because the women in this story are traveling together. It's like a group of, it's not totally clear, but you could say like 20 women, 25 women who are together in the boat going over to America, each of them off to meet a husband they've never met before. And we're going to read the story in class. And I want you to notice something very interesting about it, which is that it is not written from the perspective of one of these women. It's written from the perspective of a we. It's a we group, right? So it is simultaneously talking as this entire group of women. So that's the first thing to get your mind around. That's quite unusual. But even within this group of women, you'll notice that sometimes it will be saying details that clearly only apply to one of the women, but it's still talking about it like it was all of them. You'll see what I mean in a second. I don't mean to confuse you. So everybody, this is what I'm going to ask you to do. If you are a really, really confident reader, and you know who you are welcome to stop the video and read this entire piece. Read it slowly and think about it. If you're not as confident a reader, or if you just want my help, the second half of this video is just going to be my voice. I'm going to get on my my fancy good microphone and make it sound better than it does right now. And I'm going to be reading to you the first half of this story, and then you can read the second half yourself. I'll also be making some comments about the story as we go, which means that if you choose to listen to it, you're going to have the benefit of hearing some analysis from me. But that's the rest of class, everybody. So just to confirm, sentence pattern, you've done that. You've hopefully read a little bit of your book, and now everybody should be reading this along with me. If you're not going to listen to my version, you should be doing it on your own, but please read it carefully. It's important that you really have understood the vibe of this story, because it's going to be related to the next assignment we do. All right, everybody, thank you for working hard on a Friday. And now here comes Mr. Anderson's audio version of Come Japanese. Come Japanese by Julie Otsuka. On the boat, we were mostly virgins. We had long black hair and flat, wide feet, and we were not very tall. Some of us had eaten nothing but rice gruel as young girls and had slightly bowed legs, and some of us were only 14 years old and were still young girls ourselves. Some of us came from the city and wore stylish city clothes, but many more of us came from the country, and on the boat we wore the same old kimonos we'd been wearing for years, faded hand-me-downs from our sisters that had been patched and re-dyed many times. Some of us came from the mountains and had never before seen the sea except for in pictures, and some of us were the daughters of fishermen who had been around the sea all our lives. Perhaps we had lost a brother or father to the sea, or a fiancé, or perhaps someone we loved had jumped into the water one unhappy morning and simply swum away, and now it was time for us too to move on. On the boat, the first thing we did, before deciding who we liked and didn't like, before telling each other which one of the islands we were from and why we were leaving, before even bothering to learn each other's names, was compare photographs of our husbands. They were handsome young men with dark eyes and full heads of hair and skin that was smooth and unblemished. Their chins were strong, their posture good. Their noses were straight and high. They looked like our brothers and fathers back home, only better dressed in gray frocks and fine Western three-piece suits. Some of them were standing on sidewalks in front of wooden A-frame houses with white picket fences and neatly mowed lawns, and some were leaning in driveways against Model T Fords. Some were sitting in studios on stiff, high-backed chairs with their hands neatly folded and staring straight into the camera, as though they were ready to take on the world. All of them had promised to be there waiting for us in San Francisco when we sailed into port. On the boat, we often wondered, would we like them? Would we love them? Would we recognize them from their pictures when we first saw them on the dock? On the boat, we slept down below in steerage, where it was filthy and dim. Our beds were narrow metal racks stacked one on top of the other, and our mattresses were hard and thin and darkened with the stains of other journeys, other lives. Our pillows were stuffed with dried wheat hulls. Scraps of food littered the passageways between the berths, and the floors were wet and slick. There was one porthole, and in the evening, after the hatch was closed, the darkness filled with whispers. Will it hurt? Bodies tossed and turned beneath the blankets. The sea rose and fell. The damp air stifled. At night we dreamed of our husbands. We dreamed of new wooden sandals and endless bolts of indigo silk, and of living one day in a house with a chimney. We dreamed we were lovely and tall. We dreamed we were back in the rice paddies, which we had so desperately wanted to escape. The rice paddy dreams were also nightmares. Were always nightmares. We dreamed of our older and prettier sisters who had been sold to the geisha houses by our fathers so that the rest of us might eat, and when we woke, we were gasping for air. For a second, I thought I was her. So everybody, I'll pause there and just point out, this is what I was talking about, right? It's not the case that literally every woman on this boat had their older sisters sold to the geisha houses so the rest of the family could eat. That probably just happened to one of the women on the boat. But do you notice it's kind of talking about it like it's happened to all of them? Our first few days on the boat, we were seasick and could not keep down our food and had to make repeated trips to the railing. Some of us were so dizzy we could not even walk and lay in our berths in a dull stupor, unable to remember our own names, not to mention those of our new husbands. Remind me one more time, I'm Mrs. Who? Some of us clutched our stomachs and prayed out loud to Canaan, the goddess of mercy. Where are you? While others of us preferred to turn silently green. And often in the middle of the night we were jolted awake by a violent swell, and for a brief moment we had no idea where we were, or why our beds would not stop moving, or why our hearts were pounding with such dread. Earthquake was the first thought that usually came to our minds. We reached out for our mothers then, in whose arms we had slept until the morning we left home. Were they sleeping now? Were they dreaming? Were they thinking of us night and day? Were they still walking 3 steps behind our fathers on the streets with their arms full of packages while our fathers carried nothing at all? Were they secretly envious of us for sailing away? Didn't I give you everything? Had they remembered to air out our old kimonos? Had they remembered to feed the cats? Had they made sure to tell us everything we needed to know? Hold your teacup with both hands, stay out of the sun, never say more than you have to. Most of us on the boat were accomplished, and we were sure we would make good wives. We knew how to cook and sew. We knew how to serve tea and arrange flowers and sit quietly on our flat, wide feet for hours, saying absolutely nothing of substance and all. A girl must blend into a room. She must be present without appearing to exist. We knew how to behave at funerals and how to write short, melancholy poems about the passing of autumn that were exactly 17 syllables long. We knew how to pull weeds and chop kindling and haul water, and one of us, the rice miller's daughter, knew how to walk 2 miles into town with an 80-pound sack of rice on her back without once breaking a sweat. It's all in the way you breathe. Most of us had good manners and were extremely polite, except for when we got mad and cursed like sailors. Most of us spoke like ladies most of the time, with our voices pitched high, and pretended to know much less than we did, and whenever we walked past the deckhands, we made sure to take small, mincing steps with our toes properly in. Because how many times had our mothers told us, walk like the city, not like the farm? We'll pause there again in just another observation by me. You'll notice how when the women are talking about all the things that they're able to do, write poetry, you might have noticed the reference to a haiku, the 17-syllable poem, serve tea, how to sit and not talk for hours, all that stuff. These are distinctly Japanese things that they've been taught how to do, and things that perhaps in the time when the story takes place, which you can tell is a while ago, right? This is back in the early 1920s, 1930s. Maybe these are things that a typical Japanese wife would be expected to do. But remember, these women are going to America. And even if they are marrying Japanese men, some of them are, none of them are going to be living in Japan. They're going to be American women. And so you can tell there's kind of a culture shock that's brewing, right? The way that the women describe what it means to be a good wife is very different from what will be kind of culturally expected of them when they get to America. So let's continue on here on the bottom of page 25. On the boat, we crowded into each other's bunks every night and stayed up for hours discussing the unknown continent ahead of us. The people there were said to eat nothing but meat, and their bodies were covered with hair. We were mostly Buddhist and did not eat meat and only had hair in the appropriate places. The trees were enormous, the plains were vast, the women were loud and tall, a full head taller, we had heard, than the tallest of our men. The language was 10 times as difficult as our own, and the customs were unfathomably strange. Books were read from back to front, and soap was used in the bath. Noses were blown onto dirty cloths that were stuffed back into pockets, only to be taken out later and used again and again. The opposite of white was not red but black. What would become of us, we wondered, in such an alien land? We imagined ourselves, an unusually small people armed only with our guidebooks, entering a country of giants. Would we be laughed at, spat on, or worse yet, would we not be taken seriously at all? But even the most reluctant of us had to admit that it was better to marry a stranger in America than grow old with a farmer from the village, because in America, the women did not have to work in the fields, and there was plenty of rice and firewood for all. And wherever you went, the men held open the doors and tipped their hats and called out, "Ladies first, and after you." Some of us on the boat were from Kyoto and were delicate and fair and had lived our entire lives in darkened rooms at the back of the house. Some of us were from Nara and prayed to our ancestors 3 times a day and swore we could still hear the temple bells ringing. Some of us were farmers' daughters from Yamaguchi with thick wrists and broad shoulders who had never gone to bed after 9. Some of us were from a small mountain hamlet in Yamanishi and had only recently seen our first train. Some of us were from Tokyo and had seen everything and spoke beautiful Japanese and did not mix much with any of the others. Many more of us were from Kagoshima and spoke in a thick southern dialect that those of us from Tokyo pretended we could not understand. Some of us were from Hokkaido, where it was snowy and cold, and would dream of that white landscape for years. Some of us were from Hiroshima, which would later explode, and were lucky to be on the boat at all, though of course we did not then know it. The youngest of us was 12, and from the eastern shores of Lake Biwa, and had not yet begun to bleed. My parents married off for the betrothal money. The oldest of us was 37 and from Niigata, and had spent her entire life taking care of her invalid father, whose recent death made her both happy and sad. I knew I could only marry if he died. One of us was from Kumamoto, where there were no more eligible men. All of the eligible men had left before to find work in Manchuria, and felt fortunate to have found any kind of husband at all. I took one look at his photograph and told the matchmaker, "He'll do." One of us was from a silk-weaving village in Fukushima and had lost her first husband to the flu, and her second to a younger and prettier woman who lived on the other side of the hill, and now she was sailing to America to marry her third. He's healthy, he doesn't drink, he doesn't gamble, that's all I need to know. One of us was a former dancing girl from Nagoya who dressed beautifully and had translucent white skin and knew everything there was to know about men, and it was to her we turned every night with our questions. How long will it last? With the lamp lit or in the dark? Legs up or down? Eyes open or closed? What if I can't breathe? What if I get thirsty? What if he is too heavy? What if he is too big? What if he does not want me at all? Men are really quite simple, she told us, and then she began to explain. So let's pause there again. And so this is a very interesting paragraph for a couple reasons. One thing to notice is here again, you see the way that the voice of the author jumps back and forth between talking about all of the women collectively, but then talking about individual groups of women within the larger group, and sometimes even individuals within the larger group. And it's interesting that the voice even says that some of us would fight with the rest of us, or some of us would act like we didn't understand the other ones because we thought we were too good for them, right? So it gets a little confusing because it almost sounds like the narrator has like split personalities. But this is really the thing I want to focus on the most about this story because it's what makes it the most interesting. This voice of a group that also recognizes that there are tensions within that group. The other thing that's interesting about this passage is, again, the way that so many of these women are inexperienced and very, very young, right? They don't know anything about anything, including what it's going to be like on their wedding night, right? In the bedroom with their husbands. And so they're all very curious about that. And so obviously they spend a long time talking about it. And you really get a sense of how naive these people are, right? They have no idea what they're in for. They're taking a huge risk with their lives. All right, let's read a little bit more here. Bottom of page 27. On the boat, we sometimes lay awake for hours in the swaying, damp darkness of the hold, filled with longing and dread, and wondered how we would last another 3 weeks. On the boat, we carried with us in our trunks all the things that we would need for our new lives. White silk kimonos for our wedding night, colorful cotton kimonos for everyday wear, plain cotton kimonos for when we grew old, calligraphy brushes, thick black sticks of ink, thin sheets of rice paper on which to write long letters home, tiny brass Buddhas, ivory statues of the fox god, dolls we had slept with since we were 5, bags of brown sugar with which to buy favors, bright cloth quilts, paper fans, English phrase books, flowered silk sashes, smooth black stones from the river that ran behind our house, a lock of hair from a boy we had once touched and loved and promised to write, even though we knew we never would, silver mirrors given to us by our mothers whose last words still rang in our ears. You will see, women are weak, but mothers are strong. On the boat, we complained about everything: bedbugs, lice, insomnia, the constant dull throb of the engine which worked its way even into our dreams. We complained about the stench from the latrines, huge gaping holes that opened out onto the sea, and our own slowly ripening odor which seemed to grow more pungent by the day. We complained about Kazuko's aloofness, Chiyo's throat clearing, Fuseyo's incessant humming of the tea picker song, which was driving us all slowly crazy. We complained about our disappearing hairpins, who among us was the thief, and how the girls from first class had never once said hello from beneath their violet silk parasols all the times they had walked past us up above the deck. Just who do they think they are? We complained about the heat, the cold, the scratchy wool blankets. We complained about our own complaining. Deep down, though, most of us were really very happy, for soon we would be in America with our new husbands who had written to us many times over the months. I have brought a beautiful house. You can plant tulips in the garden, daffodils, whatever you like. I own a farm. I operate a hotel. I am president of a large bank. I left Japan several years ago to start my own business and can provide for you well. I am 179 centimeters tall and do not suffer from leprosy or lung disease, and there is no history of madness in my family. I am a native of Okayama, of Higoyo, of Miyagi, of Shizukyo. I grew up in the village next to yours and saw you once years ago at a fair. I will send you the money for your passage as soon as I can. On the boat, we carried our husbands' pictures in tiny oval lockets that hung on long chains from our necks. We carried them in silk purses and old tea tins and red lacquer boxes, and in the thick brown envelopes from America in which they had originally been sent. We carried them in the sleeves of our kimonos, which we touched often just to make sure they were still there. We carried them pressed flat between the pages of Come Japanese and Guidance for Going to America and 10 Ways to Please a Man and old, well-worn volumes of the Buddhist sutras, and one of us who was Christian and ate meat and prayed to a different and longer hair god carried hers between the pages of a King James Bible. And when we asked her which man she liked better, the man in the photograph or the Lord Jesus himself, she smiled mysteriously and replied, him, of course. All right, everybody, so that's where we're going to stop. I would like you, if you have time in class today, to finish the rest of the story yourself and pay attention to that voice and the way that it changes and the way it alternates between the we and then the individual. And yeah, that's it. So thank you for your hard work today. And this is a story we're going to return to many times for our next assignment. Thanks, everybody, for your hard work, and I will see you next time.